And so when it comes to like depression, anxiety, mental health, I think writing has played a role in helping to heal. And for me, just being able to have a platform where I can capture everything that I've been wrestling with internally and get it out. And so, I've met with many therapists over the years, and one of the therapists that I met with just described like, and Derrick, you have a lot of things that are pent up in you, and it's just they're trying to come out, but you keep bottling them in, and they have nowhere to go. And so that's why you keep on reverting to whatever your patterns are. But use poetry as that like cork, if you will, if I'm using that bottle analogy, like pop the cork and just let it out and go on, let it flow onto the paper. And so, again, that's not going to.
So I kind of want to dive straight into it when it comes to your early influences with hip hop, with poetry, with writing. Like, how did you get started in that artistry?
Yeah, I want to say, at least hip hop, right? Kid in the early 80s, mid 80s, back when, hip hop was just around. I would say that it wasn't anything I was necessarily maybe drawn to. It was just there, right? As far as back as I can remember when it comes to music, at least. And I guess, sure, my parents, right, had their music playing in the background, maybe on car rides here and there. But I'd say hip hop is what all of my friends were listening to. They always say hip hop is a culture. It truly is. And so, you just go across the board when it comes to the culture of hip hop. You had breaking going on as well. That was something that I was a part of as well, as in addition to rap. You had, turntablism. We all were messing with the turntables. If we didn't have, the Technique 1600 back in the day, we were scratching up our parents' old, RCA turntables or whatnot just to practice. And of course, growing up where I grew up, tagging and graffiti art was definitely a part of my life. And so I just think the culture itself was something that I got, acclimated to early on. And so it was, in a sense, the common language of my generation, especially growing up here in the greater LA. So that being said, I was surrounded by it. And so it was just something that became a part of who I am.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about this because right before I interviewed you, I interviewed a Chinese American hip hop artist named Jason Chu. And he was actually talking about growing up in Delaware. And so what was it like growing up in LA in the 80s? And Filipinos are minorities. So what was it about hip hop that kind of drew you into that culture?
Yeah. So, I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. So it was odd being a Filipino, pretty much the only Filipino in my neighborhood.
Really?
And so when you talk about the Filipino culture itself, interesting enough, I didn't have a lot of that influence part of me growing up. My parents really never enforced that side of me. Maybe it was an immigrant culture where they just wanted me to acclimate to the American way or the Western way. And so there wasn't necessarily this, at least early on, this tension of being Filipino and understanding my identity and, wrestling with the overarching culture of the day. And so, for me, it was just, again, like I said earlier on, it was just what it was, and that highly influenced. Now, at the time, early on, when I was turned on to hip hop, gangster rap wasn't a part of the fabric just yet. And so you're talking about, the old school, Africa Bambaataa, Melly Mel, old school, simple hip hop. And that's what I grew up on, and then of course in the 90s when gangster rap became popular, I wouldn't say, and that was, although I grew up in a predominantly gang infested neighborhood, I think the groups that I was a part of really embraced kind of the roots of hip hop. And so we really wanted, and not to say there's anything wrong with gangster rap. I think there's some phenomenal, gangster rap artists out there. It's just our style was more of like the underground LA scene, especially as that became, and I'm jumping decades now into the 90s now, but the underground hip hop culture was just something that was infectious for me because I just love the creativity of the lyricism, even the experimentation of music. But yeah, that just, it was, and again, I think I'm just going on and rambling here, but I think it
No,
was
it's
just
all
this,
good.
this beautiful like influence of who I ended up becoming. And of course, as I grew up, it just became a part of my identity.
That's so good. One of the one of the things that I have noticed just as a thread of your life while I'm listening to you talk is that there's always a rhythm to your voice. And the last time I talked to you, you talked to me about living life in rhythms, that there's a rhythm for different seasons of your life. And for people that are just getting to know you for the first time, Derrick, you've been speaking for a long time. You've been performing for many years in like doing poetry workshops and like poetry slams. You've been preaching for a long time. And so I feel like the art of communication is just embedded in your whole life. And I don't want to overstep and make assumptions here, but do you think that hip hop allowed you to embrace lyricism and language in that way at an early age, or was there more that contributed to that?
I'd say that's a part of it. The irony of me growing up, I was an introvert and I was always behind the scenes, shy kid, maybe because I was the different kid on the block, right?
Yeah.
Culturally speaking, right? I was,
Yeah.
again, the only Filipino, right? Typical when you're outside of your context, culturally. And, everyone made fun of me because I was different, right? And I think that influenced me to be quiet. Partly too, especially the groups I was a part of, I was mostly behind the scenes making the beats, the music, and sure I wrote here and there. And when the crews would go out, I would be a part of the battle raps and the circles that we were a part
So
of. But
cool.
mostly I was behind the scenes. So I'd say maybe if I'm just kind of analyzing my history, I think because I was behind the scenes, I was an observer.
Yeah.
And, I think all the years of observing, being behind the scenes, and as I began to mature and grow older, I just think a lot of that internalization of the art form just kind of, I don't know, maybe it maturated in me. It started just I don't know, this might sound cheesy, but just it lived in my veins and it just pulses through my body, right?
Yeah.
And then when I began to be more of a public eye as a soloist, as a lyricist, as a poet, and as a preacher, and even in my workspace as I am a sense of public speaker, I facilitate a lot of workshops and do a lot of consultations. I think a lot of that has allowed me to be who I am today. And yeah, I would say that, and and outside of even music and poetry, I just think living in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, you talked about rhythm and you used that word. I think because it wasn't the most safest places to live in, I would even, and I love how you use the rhythm, because I would even say that there was a rhythm of where we could be at certain times, right? We had to know the pulse of the neighborhood at any given moment, right? Because it was, all right, well, we got to run, we got to survive because something's about to go down, right? Or you got sirens, like literally, I don't know if you can hear it, but you can hear sirens now. That was the rhythm of my life growing up. Every time we would hear sirens, we had to run. And so I would say that not only lyrically and creatively, but even as a life rhythm, if you will, there was this sense of just having to know when to move. And if I could describe, I guess, life as a child, I just think even that it was like a city beat, if you will, right? Not just running from the law, but hey, here's some, rivaling, gang, sets coming through, or even in the breaking context, like when we would battle other breaking crews, right? It's like there's this rhythm that you had to just kind of know and feel and sense, right? Just to know when was an appropriate place to be or not, and so yeah, it was I think I can unpack that just forever, but I love that word rhythm.
That's good. So why didn't you go into dance? Like, why music? Why lyricism? Why music? Because I can imagine when you talk about beats, right? Like just dancing to the beat of the different places that you had to be or things that you had to watch out for. Was it like you talk about the history and what was going on in LA at that time and being the only Filipino kid, like what drew you to continue to do it up till now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Something I don't talk about often is I actually did get into dance a little bit, right? And so all the way up until college. Like I went to Cal State Long Beach. That's where I went to my, undergrad. I was a part of a group called Pac Modern, and we competed, not just in the collegiate level, but, we went to Import Show Off and things like that. And so I was part of crews. And I think, again, you go back to my upbringing of breakdancing, and even like in high school, right? I was part of breaking crews where we go around and battle. And I think because of that, it allowed me an opportunity when I was in college to pursue that. Now, and I'm not going to use aging as an excuse, but it's a reason. But your true. Bones are not as flexible as they once were, right? And so I just think the way that I used to dance was just very, I guess the word is aggressive in the way. I mean, any breaker, would be aggressive. And, the older I got, I just couldn't do it anymore, but all the while, I think, again, you're talking about the culture of hip hop, and you look at like the typical 4 elements, as I mentioned earlier. And so I think dancing was a part of my life, breaking up into a certain point, but, just lyricist and the rap sense. And, more so now it's poetry than it is, traditional rap. But I just think, I don't know. I think that aspect of the culture of hip hop, just for me, it was an easier natural fluidity, I guess, for expression for me. Dancing, tagging, even turntablism, but I just think the lyrical part of the culture just continued to carry on, and maybe because when I was introduced to hip hop, that was the first element that I embraced versus the other 4 or the other 3, and beatboxing, if you want to add like a asterisk 5th element of hip hop, but I just think because I embraced lyricism early on. That's what just stuck even till this day, right? And some would argue that even some of my spoken word pieces can sound very, rap-like, right? Obviously not to beats, but but I'd say it's just that side of the culture of hip hop just continued because it just. What I continue to practice. And even as a public speaker in whether it's the church or even my workspace, like, and I think you're picking up on it where you hear a rhythm in my voice. I think I am able to, interesting enough, whether it's at the pulpit or even leading, like a Fortune 500 company, right? Like when I do public speaking, it's like there's ways that I can incorporate that into what I'm trying to communicate.
Has spoken word for you changed as you became a father and a husband? Like, do the things that you think about, are the contents evolving when it comes to those roles that you play in your life?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because if I look, I mean, sure, I guess, the fact that I have kids now, I do write about kids sometimes, right? Or at least my kids. Whereas before I had kids, I wasn't writing about kids, right? And same thing with being married, like, so I guess, sure, as far as maturity, maybe too, if I really think hard about it, just because as you mature, as you gain more experience in life, so too your pieces, your artwork as well, right? I think one thing, so I've been getting into this rhythm of pulling out my old school typewriter, right?
Oh, God,
old
so
school,
cool.
like Royal typewriter, right? No, that's the brand, Royal. No, it's not electric. It's just straight up. Like, if you mess up, I mean, you're just gonna have to start over because there's no backspace. I mean, there's a backspace, but there's really no correction unless you like put on some whiteout or something like that and retype it. But I've been getting in this rhythm where most Sunday afternoons I find like a local coffee shop and just pull out the typewriter and I start typing. Now, I'd say over the past maybe 5 years, and I'll get back to the typewriter, but a lot of my pieces now I've tried to embrace more of the traditional poetry formats, right? Versus just spoken word that's free form, that's just kind of like, just going all out in my creativity, allowing me to just flow. With the poetry formats, there's a lot of structure. There's a lot of metric, right? With a lot of that. And, because you're so limited in space when you're typing, I consider formatted poetry, it has its limits. And you have to stick within a certain structure, a certain rhythm, right, for it to be true to that format. And it's challenged my creativity, right? And because, if I'm writing and let's say there's this term called iambic pentameter, which means 10 syllables per line.
Yeah.
Well, if it was just me writing a traditional spoken word, I can go like forever on a line, right? But because I have to be intentional about the words that I choose per line, the syllables that I choose per line, it's forced me to really sit back and think. And I think it's really matured me as a poet. And then of course, you bring in the topics we bring out, whether it's about my family, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about life, faith, what have you. I wouldn't say I sit very long to think about what I write about. They usually just come. It's really trying to fit what I want to talk about within the structure of whatever format I'm trying to write. And so, I just think over time, I just think across the board, yes, I think my pieces have matured. I think they've become a little bit more, I just use that word again, a little bit more mature, both in content and format.
When you said earlier, the subject just comes, I just have to learn how to fit it in this traditional structure of poetry. Since you started doing the typewriter, or using the typewriter is the right way to say it. When you talk about that, like, was that easy for you, Derrick, for the content to just like come out of you, or was it developed over time?
I'd say if I think back, and we're trying to think holistically about my life in this realm of creativity. I just think even dating back to my early hip hop days, I just think they came naturally. Of course, when I was a part of crews, we all thought about what we wanted to write about. Even when I was in a band in college, me and the other lyricists would think about what we wanted to write about. And so, those were already, I guess for the lack of words, like predetermined what we were going to, write about as far as the songs go. And so I just think, I don't know, the way I approach writing is I don't try to force myself to write about something unless it's given to me. Like if I'm asked to go share somewhere and they have a theme and they say, hey, can you talk about love, or can you bring up a poem about XYZ? If I already have a piece that fits that requirement, then I'll just recite that. But if I don't, then, I would have to, just go with the flow with what they're requiring of me. But like, for instance, this past weekend, when I was writing, I just sat down and I looked up. I was under this umbrella at this coffee shop, and the shadows of the branches of a tree were just like dancing around. And that's what the poem was about.
Wow.
Halfway through, of course, like I used that dancing shadows as a metaphor for struggling with depression. Right. And so, and then there was another piece like a week prior to that. Like I just watched a butterfly and I ended up writing about a butterfly. Right. Or it could be just something that comes to me about like faith or my family, And so again, I could just sit there and whatever comes to mind, I'll just begin to write, and then I'll figure out which poetry format I want to write in, and then try to fit it in that box.
Yeah. I hear a lot of creatives talk about mental health in a way that like their art is a form of healing. Do you see poetry and lyricism as a way to heal from the depression or the mental health issues? It's because as a therapist, I want to be able to hear it from a creator's perspective.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah, I don't think it's the cure all for everything, right?
Yeah.
I think it's part of the process, right? Similar to, I think, therapy. Going to therapy is part of the process. I don't think it's the cure all for everything. Same thing with like physical ailments. I think medicine can be a part of the process of healing, but I think there's a lot of elements that go into our collective healing. And so when it comes to like depression, anxiety, mental health, I think writing has played a role in helping to heal. And for me, just being able to have a platform where I can capture everything that I've been wrestling with internally and get it out. And so, I've met with many therapists over the years, and one of the therapists that I met with just described like, and Derrick, you have a lot of things that are pent up in you, and it's just they're trying to come out, but you keep bottling them in, and they have nowhere to go, and so that's why you keep on reverting to whatever your patterns are. But use poetry as that like cork, if you will, if I'm using that bottle analogy, like pop the cork and just let it out and go on, let it flow onto the paper. And so, again, that's not going to cure you, but at least you're letting it out, let it live on paper, and mess with the words to creatively, form this piece of art that you're trying to create. And then of course, when you recite it, it takes it to another level, because then you have emotions that go into your performance. And again, even that, you've already written the piece, it's already out, you've already experienced this, a piece of healing just by writing it. But then when you're able to recite it in front of other people, that's another part of the healing process, right? That's in the faith world, we call that the confession part, right? Because confession is also a part of the healing process, and it's like any like AA meeting, right? Like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like, you confess, hey, I'm here, my name is so and so, and I'm an addict. It's like that's the first step of healing. And so, I'd say so. I'd say this creative journey of mine, writing, reciting, has helped to really deal with the mental health issues that I struggle with and still currently struggle with, and really work to continually heal, right? And I mean, as a person of faith, do I believe I can like snap my fingers and be completely healed? Sure, because if I believe in God, then I got to believe in a greater entity that can overcome anything I'm going through. Otherwise, that wouldn't be God. But again, I think healing is an ongoing process that I think I'll continue to deal with for the rest of my life. And it'll be, I think, little bits at a time. It won't be as rampant in me as it was yesterday, as I grow older. But as I heal, as I'm able to process myself, what I'm seeing is, being able to be in spaces then to help other people, right? Obviously, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I can share my journey with others who are going through similar situations, share what I've been able to do in poetry and how I'm able to recite, right? And so, similarly, and this is not about me per se, but, a friend of mine, right, he has bipolar disorder, and he's working with his therapist in art, like painting, right, as a form to help him, right, deal with his episodes. And it's helped tremendously. And so whether it's writing or art or any form of creativity, I definitely believe that there's a place that it can help foster a place of healing.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I think that, when people talk about living in creativity, the narrative that we always get in mainstream culture is, how do I make money from this? And how do I use this as a career? And so you see a lot of podcast episodes talk about that or give you advice about that. But I think the distinction in what you're talking about here, Derrick, is it's almost like a way for you to understand yourself and to just let it out. And I think that sometimes, your evolution as an author is understanding, like, why am I doing it? And what's my motivation behind this? So I'm hearing you talk about these themes of self-discovery that just come up, and how poetry actually helps center you and helps you stay present in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because at one point, now this was before poetry was my main vehicle for creativity back in my rap group hip hop days. Like, I wasn't even intending to go to college. That was my pursuit. Right.
That's
like,
good.
Look, it was going to be like, look, we're going to do this, and it's this or bust. Right. And, as we continue to pursue it, and maybe it was a subconscious thing, I didn't declare it on the mountains or anything like that. I just resolved in myself, like, look, I don't think that this is something I truly want to pursue as a career. But I believe I can experience both in whatever pursuits that I decide that I want to journey on, whether it's pursuing a 9 to 5 or starting my own business. I just really in me knew that this would be a part of my life wherever I go.
Oof,
I
like
and
that.
so whether it was through pastoral ministry, like whether it was in active ministry for the past 20 years of my life, or even what I'm doing now in my quote unquote 9 to 5 job, I'm finding ways to incorporate poetry in every aspect of what I do. Right. And I'm able to, periodically, like you had mentioned earlier at the top, teach creative writing workshops through the community. I'm able to be invited to different nonprofit groups to share what I do and share the art form with other people, right? And to your point, or to what you said earlier about being present, I'm able to find ways to be present in whatever I'm given at the moment, but still find ways. Like I'll look at it as like a sheath, like if like bow and arrows, right? It's like
Yeah.
poetry is one of those arrows that I can always pull from the sheath wherever I am. Again, whether that's the church setting or, corporate setting, or whether it's community setting, I'm able to find ways, right? And
Wow.
I'll even find ways to utilize poetry within my fatherhood, where if I'm trying to, share something with one of my children and trying to not necessarily teach them a lesson, but just talk to them about life, like I'll remember a poem that I wrote, and I'll literally just opening it up on my phone. If I have my journal, I'll flip through the pages and say, "Hey, listen to this," and I'll read it to them. Or if I have committed it to memory, I'll recite it to them and really say, "Hey, this is what I was trying to communicate." Right? It's as if, right, and use the metaphors and similes in the pieces for however you interpret them to be, but. Right. If I'm stuck trying to communicate something to my child about life lessons or whatever, I'll literally stop and say, "Hey, actually, let me recite this to you, or let me read this to you. This is what I'm trying to say."
That's good.
And so again, it's being present in the moment, but still having like everything that hip hop and poetry and creativity has formed me to being able to then be that in any given moment. Right. Yeah.
I think it kind of reinforces what you said about poetry is a role to my healing. And I think that, so many of us see creativity as the only way forward. But I think that when you see it as a tool, it starts to act as like a healing, not the end all be all, but it helps you understand yourself. I feel like if I was growing up as your kid, I would understand things in such a colorful way because you're giving a if and or simile metaphor way of seeing the world that helps me expand my worldview, but also be good at listening to others as well. And so I really like that perspective because I think that similar to what you've mentioned before, Derrick, you don't have to do this as your only job. It doesn't have to be your identity. It can be something that adds to your life and doesn't take away from your life. And you've lived so many different careers. You've been a pastor, you've been a breakdancer, you've been a lyricist, you're a father, your husband. There's so many different things that make up who you are. Was there ever a time where you battled with the fact that you weren't a creative, quote unquote, full time? How do you see vocation and career when it comes to utilizing creativity?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I mentioned earlier, I just think internally I had resolved that I wasn't going to be the next, right? Or even the groups that I was a part of, we weren't going to be the next. Like even, when I was in that band in college, Elements of the Outer Realm, I mean, we performed at some pretty, iconic places, whether it was, all that Sunset Boulevard clubs, whether it's Whiskey A Go-Go or Lyricist or whatever, even Lollapalooza at one point in Denver. It's even appeared on, K-Rock's Jed the Fish, right? So it was like, okay, look, we're getting somewhere, right? And this is going to be cool. But I think just internally I'd resolved that, okay, if this doesn't work out, it's okay. Like I'm okay with that, and I might be in the minority of the quote unquote, the mentality of having this starving artist, right? And I think internally I was telling myself, look, okay, I could be a starving artist, or I can actually find something to support my artistry, right? Like I don't have to be that. And maybe it had to do with having a family early on, right? I mean, I could pursue this dream, sure, and the payoff would be fantastic if we actually made it, but that's a big if. I still have a family to support. So, let's find ways. And maybe that's why ministry worked so well for me, to be able to, build a church and work with that community, but still have the flexibility to do anything creative, whether it's still reciting poetry, at conferences, church conferences, or outside of the church context, whether it's at open mics, at poetry readings and such. And so I was able to, again, if I was invited to perform somewhere far, right? Like as a starving artist, like, what? Am I going to open up like
get there?
Right. Okay, I need to do a GoFundMe to pay for my plane ticket to go recite somewhere, because the honor of being invited, but I have to find my way there. Like, well, if I had like a job to support that, then that wouldn't be a problem. Right. And so I just think internally, whatever you want to call it, Holy Spirit, life, whatever, was just telling me, look, you can have the best of both worlds. It's okay. Right. And then along the way, if I did quote unquote made it, then sure, I would pursue that. But, I'm nearing 50 in a couple of years. And so it's like,
you look pretty good.
All right,
for
like,
50.
like I'm well along in years. Right. So I think, and I was talking to my wife about this, she went back to teaching, after being a stay-at-home mom for like 12, 13 years. And she went back to the classroom, and we were both just like, wow, like, okay, we're still in ministry too, not full time, but like, you're like, oh, we have the means to now take care of ourselves. Right? Like there's something nice, but we also have the freedom to still be who we are. Right? We're not like sacrificing, like she as a musician, and the singer, me as a poet. We're not sacrificing that side of us, because we're able to utilize it. Like she sings in her classroom, she incorporates music into her lessons, right? It may not be like performing at SoFi, but she's still, utilizing her creativity. And similar to me, it's not like I'm touring the world with a band, or even, touring the world as a spoken word artist, but I'm still able to utilize my artistry wherever I go. And I'm more than just okay with that. Like I'm excited for that I get to have the best of both worlds.
That's so beautiful. And especially when I didn't know your wife was a musician, singer, songwriter. I think that's incredibly beautiful how you guys used your talents to be lights in ministry, but also in your journeys in life as well. Yeah. Derrick, I want to go to like really giving advice to future creatives, because I think that we just talked a lot about your career doesn't always have to be your art. Sometimes your art can add to your career. When we talk about listeners wanting to pursue their passion as a means of self-expression and not just for monetary gain, if you were to go back 10 years ago to maybe like early 30s Derrick, who was in a very different season of his life, was that something that he struggled with, creativity as a form of self-expression, or would it be another season of life that you would give this advice to?
Early 30s, I would say that was roughly early marriage, one kid or so, still in ministry. Yeah, I mean, so all that to say, everything I had just said, I'd be lying if I didn't say there were seasons where I had to put poetry and creativity on the shelf for a little bit, right? To focus on whatever it is I had to focus on, right? So there was seasons. A lot of people talk about writer's block. I think I went through seasons of writer's amnesia where I literally just forgot how to, because I didn't put it into practice, right? So there were those seasons. Right. For whether it was for the sake of, planting a church or focusing on leadership development. Right. So there were seasons. And so if I were to go back to tell that person, that 30-year-old Derrick, I would tell that person what I know now is that you can have the best of both worlds, kind of to go back to the previous question. In addition to that, I would say, don't be afraid to carve out time for this aspect of your life, right?
Wow.
Like you don't have to go all in on one. Like I
Wow.
did back then. I went all in church planting. So I put everything on the shelf. I even left, I think I was, yeah, because I was in the band collectively for like 10 years or 10 plus years. I left for a season because I felt like that's what I had to do. And then I went back and, and then we ended up not performing anymore. But I would say you can have, you don't have to go all in on one. You don't have to sacrifice, right? And I used that word earlier. Like I did sacrifice that part of me. So I would say that. The second thing I would say is keep learning your craft. Right? Don't think that you know everything there is to know, right? So back then I was doing spoken word, just all free stuff. But now, like as I mentioned earlier, like I'm loving a lot of the formatted poetry, like writing sonnets and cinquains. Like I didn't realize there was a format like haiku sonnets. I'm like, what? There's a haiku sonnet, right? Like what the heck? And then all these other formats that I can't even begin to pronounce, right? And a lot of them are French, a lot of them, are Italian, and it's beautiful. I would have never imagined as a 30-year-old spoken word poet that I would be really committed to learning poetry in this sense, right? Really falling in love with meter and metric and really allowing, that side of me to be refined. Because then when I do take time to write spoken word, like just this free form kind of 5-minute performance piece, I'm finding myself a lot more mature in that as well. And I'm seeing a lot of my influence that I've gleaned from writing formatted poetry come out in that as well. And so again, you don't have to, you don't have to go all in on one thing. You can diversify yourself. And then two, again, don't be afraid to continue learning your craft, right? I don't think, like I was talking to a coworker earlier who, she went to the Rolling Stones concert, right? You're talking about folks who are in their late 70s and 80s. Wow. And even still, I think artists that old are still learning. I don't think you're ever too old to learn your craft. And you shouldn't be too arrogant to think that there's nothing else you can learn, because there's always something you can learn, specifically in the creative sense, right?
Derrick, you're so countercultural. I love it.
Thanks. No, I mean, I don't try to be, but
I'll explain what I mean by that. It's, if you look at the landscape of how people see creativity right now, it's extremely limited, where people think that life is this all or nothing way of living. Yeah. But I think as a creative and a mental health therapist, it doesn't have to always be that way. And I think that, one of the things I appreciate about your perspective, the reason why I call it so counterculture, is because you don't want to sacrifice your peace and your well-being for the sake of art, where art can contribute to your life. It doesn't always have to take away. And I think that, so much of culture is like, if it's not making you $10,000 a month, it's not worth doing. Yeah. And so I love how you remove the economic piece of it, and you just really started talking about your own healing and how it was really fundamental for the way that you understood yourself. It just sounds so pure the way you talk about it. So I'm grateful for you.
And at the end of the day, and thank you for saying that, at the end of the day, and maybe this is the corporate side of me, it's like, if you're going into debt because of your artistry, that's not financially wise, right? Like if you're 100%. Having to open up so many credit cards just to go somewhere or just to produce an album, like that's not wise, because the payoff is like, if you don't make it, you got to pay this off somehow. And, and so I think that was part of it too, my understanding, like, look, I can put myself into debt pursuing this, but it's not the most wisest thing to do.
No, I appreciate that. All right, Derrick, I'm going to end it here, but I appreciate you. And thank you so much for sharing your words with me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. It was fun. And thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, of course. At the end of the episode, I think you deserve a thank you. Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast, wouldn't be anything without followers like you. I promise you that the production of these podcasts will continue to increase as the listeners increase and the followers increase. And so if you can do me a favor, if you found any value from this podcast episode, please give this a like, share, or subscribe to the show. It really helps us out. It keeps the word going and it helps our impressions. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next Friday.